today to hear three judges describe her and her former deputy, David Weeks, as liars. Lord Justice Rose told the court they lied to us as they had done to the auditor because they had the ulterior purpose of altering the electorate. They did it by boarding up empty council flats and concentrating their sales in marginal wards in an attempt to boost the Tory vote. An unlawful policy judges described as very much Dame Shirley's baby. In a statement through her solicitor, though, she said she would seek leave to appeal and expressed delight that three others had been cleared.
I am therefore surprised by today's judgment regarding myself and David Weeks. I will now be consulting my lawyers about a number of matters arising from this judgment.
For Peter Hartley and two others cleared of willful misconduct, it was the end of a nightmare that would have meant financial ruin.
I don't want anybody else to have to go through what I've had to and the other appellants have had to do over the last 8 years. I think the system is wrong. The public have to be protected and have to know what's going on in politics, but the system must be changed.
While backing the auditor, John McGill's main findings, the judges were critical of the 7 years he took to complete his inquiry and the way he held a news conference to announce his first findings. But today, he felt vindicated.
So overall, I'm very, very pleased. Thank you very much.
Dame Shirley Porter was described by judges as a counsellor of high ability, formidable personality and single-minded determination. Now the Conservative flagship she once led faces pursuing her for her share of a £27 million bill. It's now up to Westminster Council itself to pursue the £27 million owed to it by its former leader and deputy leader. But the council says it won't start that process until any decision on an appeal. So this long-running saga, already 10 years old, may not be over just yet. John Andrew, BBC News at the High Court.
Sussex Police Authority has been hearing about the continuing...
She lied to us, say three High Court judges. Dame Shirley Porter loses her appeal in the Westminster Homes for Votes affair. But will the former council leader ever pay back the £27 million she owes?
Also tonight, Eurotunnel infuriates the British Army and hundreds of passengers.
And some good news for Christmas. A little bit of what you fancy drinking is good for you.
Good evening.
Welcome to Newsroom South East. Dame Shirley Porter and her deputy did manipulate the sales of council homes to keep the Conservatives in control of Westminster Council. Then they lied about it over and over. That was the finding of three High Court judges today, who ruled that the former council leader and her deputy, David Weeks, should pay back the £27 million their disgraceful and improper gerrymandering cost the council taxpayers of Westminster. The judges ruled that three others had been wrongly surcharged. They are former Housing Committee Chairman Peter Hartley, Westminster's former Managing Director Bill Phillips, and Graham England, former Chief Housing Officer. Tim Donovan reports now on this latest chapter of the Homes for Votes scandal.
It was 10 years ago that people living on this estate in Bayswater first started to notice that empty council flats were not being re-let. It emerged that while homeless people were being kept in bed and breakfast, these properties were being sold off. It was all designed to establish more conservative voters here. It was, in simple terms, social engineering for the purpose of keeping power.
The architect of that unlawful scheme was not in court to hear the judgment against her, but Dame Shirley Porter's solicitor delivered her response.
We have already been advised, in the light of the decision regarding the others, that we have strong grounds for appeal.
It was after the 1986 local elections that Porter created the policy of selling off vacant homes in 8 marginal wards. Because it was figured owner-occupiers were more likely to vote Conservative, it could increase the Tories' then slender majority on Westminster Council. Porter was aided by her deputy David Weeks, who didn't attend today either. Their roles were described as intertwined. In their 92-page judgment, the three High Court judges said it was impossible for Dame Shirley Porter to contend that she believed at any stage that targeting marginal wards for electoral advantage was legally permissible.
She and her deputy claimed in evidence that they abandoned the policy, but in the judge's view, Porter and Weeks lied to us as they had done to the auditor because they had the ulterior purpose of altering the electorate.
My provisional view is that the council was engaged in gerrymandering.
The auditor John McGill's decision to give this press conference 3 years ago was criticised by the judges, but he left court today pleased that claims that his conduct of the inquiry was biased had been rejected. For those deemed to have been wrongly surcharged, there was relief.
I didn't know what to expect, to be honest. It's been a long time and a very complex and involved inquiry. Very pleased that the courts have found in my favour.
The council leader, who was for a decade a favourite in Downing Street, is still defiant, but her legal options are running out. So after a decade, campaigners who've always maintained that there was wrongdoing have been vindicated by this damning ruling in the High Court. There is yet the possibility of further legal wranglings, but it has now been established by a court that this was one of the most scandalous episodes in local government history. Tim Donovan, Newsroom South East, Bayswater.
And we can speak now to Dr. Richard Stone, who, as a GP in one of those manipulated marginal wards, approached the district auditor and first began to uncover the Homes for Votes scandal. Dr. Stone, you were a GP. How did you uncover this political scandal?
I saw that empty council flats were being kept empty for a year or 2 years prior to being sold off on the open market at discounts. That seemed to me to be wrong, because I was seeing homeless families that needed homes. I was seeing people who are category A medically urgent on the housing list who weren't getting housed. You know, people who have sort of maybe lost a leg or something, or elderly people who are stuck upstairs on a 4th floor of a terraced house. And they needed these empty council flats. And I thought, well, district auditors around the country in Liverpool and Lambeth and so on were stopping council policies that were illegal. And when I found out that very simple questions, that this was costing my council something like £5 and £6 million a year, I wrote to the auditor and asked him to stop it.
So after all that's happened today, how do you feel? You don't sound elated.
Well, of course I'm not elated, because the distressing thing is that all this £27 million that people are talking about, none of that's going to go in compensation to the people who never got their homes. The fact is that something like 2,000 homes have been lost to the council pool, so that they will never be available for homeless families. We're talking about nowadays social exclusion. The previous government claimed itself to be the party of the family. If we're concerned about the sorts of people that are going to grow up, children now are going to grow up into what sort of adults are going to grow up, one of the basic needs of children is for a decent home. And the clear message, I think, from this judgment today is that we have to decide, what are our homes for? Are they there for homeless families to be able to have a decent home and for elderly people to live their last years in comfort? Or are they there to be manipulated by people in power to keep themselves in power? And what I'm very pleased about, I suppose, is that 3 judges have confirmed that the homes are for people and not for manipulation for power purposes.
All right, Dr. Stone, thank you very much indeed. Unanswered questions there from one of the men who first began uncovering the scandal. We shall now seek some answers, we hope, from the local government Minister Hilary Armstrong, who is in our Westminster studio. Minister, thank you. First of all, and briefly if you can, it is up to Westminster Council itself to try to recover this £27 million from Dame Shirley and Mr. Weeks. What chance of it being recovered?
Well, I don't know. I assume that Mrs. Porter will want to make sure that she pays her debt to the council taxpayers of Westminster. It is a debt to the people of Westminster. They have borne the cost of the gerrymandering that's been going on.
Well, the big problem, of course, is that, as Dr. Stone said, the effects of this gerrymandering are almost irreparable.
They are. There are many, many families who were not able to get adequate housing at the time they needed. That's why it's very important that we are now moving into new ways of making sure that councils do abide by the law and act in the interests of the people that they serve.
Well, can we talk about those new ways? This is a big question for the future, isn't it? You must know that Lord Nolan's report on standards and conduct in local government recommends abolishing this surcharge, which he says is unfair and means chasing people around the world trying to get money out of them, and bringing in a criminal offence that would, in effect, have Dame Shirley and David Weeks heading for prison now. You've pledged to improve standards. Will you implement this?
The Prime Minister announced in July, I think it was, that we were committed to that sort of action. and we have been consulting with local government and others interested in this.
With respect, and very briefly, that's not quite the same thing. Will you implement this?
We will seek to implement it once we know that we've got the terms of the legislation right and of exactly what needs to be done. If you're going to have this sort of very important change, you've got to get it right. So we are consulting, and we will be putting our ideas out in the new year and seeking a white paper later in the year.
Minister, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, in other news, the Army has accused Eurotunnel of jeopardising the safety of British soldiers by reporting that